attractivity of the confrontation with America for a candidate to premiership is part of the populistic, nationalistic trend that you've also identified, which is, you know, the world is against us, העולם כולו נגדנו, we will manage. Okay, so that's part of it, unfortunately. My question goes to you, Scott. You said that the strategic environment is not that compelling for the US to act right now. And my proposition is rather the opposite. There's a lot that the United States could do currently because Israel has converging interests and concerns with so many of the relatively moderate Sunni regimes around us, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, etc. Namely, you know, Iran and its proxies and the fundamentalist, terrorist organizations, etc. And I believe that this is a good ground for the United States to operate on. So I'd like to hear your comment on that. Thank you.
And I would just add, we have two people who worked under the Obama administration here, and Bob Freedman, who went through the whole histories, but not that you necessarily be listened to, but in terms of one recommendation, if you would be listened to, what would it be in this direction? Because you give us a lot of food for thought in terms of the kind of analysis you've given, but if you had to pick kind of one concrete thing today, and that might relate to some of the issues Cindy's talking about, perhaps. So who'd want to start? You want to? I forget which. Whoever just goes.
Polite Americans.
Yeah, we're all being polite. Okay, so so I'm going to try and address this point about religion and religious ideology, but first, Gili, I have to respond a little bit on the question you asked Scott, because although I've spent the first chunk of my career on the Arab-Israeli conflict, I've actually spent most of the last 15 years on the Arab world, and the last year in particular, a lot of time in the Gulf, talking to them about the geopolitics of the region and their certainly their congruence of interest with Israel. And what I would say is that there's a lot of potential there, but we shouldn't oversell it. And as we saw with the embassy move, where Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia at first came out and with a very, very mild reaction, but could not sustain it. Both because Saudi was outbid by the Jordanians and the Turks on the issue, and because public opinion in Saudi Arabia was not with him. His king, his father, had to overrule him and pull it back and assert Saudi support for Palestinian rights in Jerusalem. And I think that this is a good illustration of the hard constraints that all Arab states face in taking their relationship with Israel out of the closet, so to speak. So I think Israel is going to be the mistress, but not out of the closet until there's real movement with the Palestinians. And this is because their own legitimacy, the Arab leaders' legitimacy, is so weak and compromised. They just can't risk it right now. And this, I think, comes a little bit to the question that you posed. So look, we're Americans. We have a civic culture that's not rooted in religion or ethnicity, but most of the rest of the world doesn't operate that way. As somebody who's spent my career in the Middle East, where all of these ideologies are running around, here's what I would try to leave you with. None of these things are absolutes. Yes, Sunnis and Shia in Iraq have been killing each other quite a bit over the last 10, 12 years. But they, before that, intermarried quite a bit. Mizrahi and Ashkenazi in Israel had tremendous political tension. I don't even know what the intermarriage rates are, 25%, so it's significant. The point being here, ethnic differences, religious differences are something that political leaders mobilize around. They deploy, they use them, but they're not innately hostile. They have ingredients of hostility that get picked up and mobilized. They have ingredients of tolerance that can get picked up and mobilized. So what I'd like to see is a world where the incentives are for political leaders to mobilize the coexistence and the pluralism and the tolerance rather than the conflict and the violence. But it's not inevitable that because these identities are distinct, that they're going to kill each other. I don't think it's true of Muslims and Jews. In fact, before I went to grad school, I was working for the American Jewish Congress, and the biggest part of my job was working with American Muslims and American Arabs, jointly lobbying for intervention to halt the genocide in Bosnia. So it all depends on what you do with it.
Yeah, I'll just tack on quickly to Gilad Sher's question. The strategic environment and the alignment between Israel and other regional players, Sunni Arab parties, sure, it's significant, but number one, and I wasn't saying it because I place a value on it, I'm just saying compared to how the U.S. was trying to leverage the end of the Cold War, or how we were responding to the 1973 war, and Kissinger and Nixon are faced with, Israel or oil, but, found a third way. It just doesn't quite stack up. But I would also say to that, and I say it with some sadness, as someone who's very committed to a two-state solution, believes it would be very beneficial to our country, to the countries in the region and all. The current alignment, this alignment that you described, that some of our colleagues at INSS are living and breathing and talking about from morning until late at night, can be applied to other issues. That's the problem. It can just as easily, in fact, maybe more easily, be pointed toward Iran and a project that has very little to do with Arab-Israeli peacemaking. I'd like, and maybe we can spend dinner and hallway time talking about it, how to rein it in and leverage it for peacemaking, because it certainly speaks to many things. I didn't get into all the lessons from our book, but another lesson from towards the end of the Clinton experience, which you know better than anyone, you were engaged in it, when you reduce a conflict as complicated as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to just those two actors. And when we didn't bring in any of the Arab players to those last 6 months of furtive diplomacy, and instead when the peace summit fails and we send a diplomat around to Arab capitals to say, oh, but we have these ideas about Jerusalem and this and that, and Mubarak and the Saudis and others say, wow, why didn't you tell us? You're onto something because it's a multi-party negotiation. And perhaps as Americans, because we got so many lawyers involved in diplomacy, and we're also so struck by Begin, Carter, and Sadat, we often think in dyads, one party and another. And to be fair, it's the Israelis who often point us in that direction. We want to have, one-on-one negotiations. We fell out of practice for a while, and it's taken us a long time to recover and to understand how this particular conflict, Israel and Palestinians, is going to be a 3, 4, 5, or 6-way negotiation, not the traditional two.
Let me say a word about religion as well, because to answer that question, it's not the religion, it's who interprets it. One of the big problems that I see is that Arafat made a critical mistake in 2000 when he labeled the Second Intifada the Al-Aqsa Intifada, which then injected more the issue of religion into it. And it actually strengthened Hamas against them. He just didn't realize the unintended consequences. True, in the Quran, there are lots of anti-Jewish comments, but they deal with the fact that Muhammad was fighting Jewish tribes in Medina. And any Friday afternoon, a preacher can get up and read one of those and blame the Jews. They fought Muhammad, Israel's fighting us now. But they don't have to choose those verses. So again, it's who interprets it.